On humility. One of the fathers used to say, "Prior to all other things we require humility, being prepared to listen to whatever word is spoken to us, and to say in response, 'I submit,' for by humility every means of the foe, every type of hindrance, is destroyed." What is the meaning of these words? Why did he state, "Before all else we need humility, and not, we require self-control"? For the apostle declares, "All who strive for mastery keep from all things." Or why did he not declare, "Before all else we require a fear of God"? Because it is written, "The beginning of wisdom is the fear of the Lord." It also says, "With the fear of the Lord one turns away from wickedness." Or why did he not declare, "Prior to all else we require almsgiving or faith"? Because it is said that through faith and charity we are purified from sin, and so the apostle states, "Without faith it is impossible to please God." If then it is impossible to please God if we lack faith, and faith and charity purify from sin, and by fear one turns from evil, and the beginning of wisdom is the fear of the Lord, and a man who contends for mastery keeps from everything, why does he state, "Before everything we require humility," and puts aside all these required things? The saint wanted to show us that neither the fear of God, nor faith, nor self-control, or any of the other virtues can correct us if we lack humility. So rightly he says, "Prior to all else we require humility, being prepared to listen to whatever word is said to us, and to say, 'I submit.' Because by humility every means of the foe, and every hindrance is destroyed." About humility. Brothers, think how great is the power of humility. Think about how great is the spiritual energy behind saying, "Excuse me." Why is the devil referred to not only as a foe, but also an adversary? He is referred to as a foe on account of his hatred for men. One who hates what is good is a traitor. He is an adversary, for he continually places hindrances in the path of goodness. If someone would like to pray, he puts hindrances in the way with evil suspicions, disgraceful thoughts, and spiritual apathy. If one would like to give alms, he hinders it through greed or procrastination. If one wants to keep a vigil, he hinders it with hesitations or laziness. In all things he is against us when we want to do good. This is why he is referred to as the foe and the adversary, and why, through humility, all his attacks and schemes are destroyed. Humility is truly a great thing, for all types of good are advanced by humility, and by working at it we lessen our journey, as it states, "Regard my humility and my labor, and take away all my sins. And I was humiliated, and the Lord delivered me." Because humility alone can guide us into the spiritual life, as Abbot John used to tell us, even if it is slow. So, let us also be humble for a brief time, and we will be saved. Even if we are unable to suffer many toils because we are weak, may we work to make ourselves humble. I steadfastly believe that, with the mercy of God, a little thing done with a humble nature will enable us to be discovered there, in the same abode as the holy ones who have toiled greatly, and been genuine servants of God. Yes, we are quite weak, and cannot toil much, but can we not at least be humble? Truly happy, brothers, is the one who has genuine humility. A great thing is humility. Well, it was pointed out by that saint, who had genuine humility and who said, "Humility does not become angry, and does not upset anyone." This seems an odd thing, because humility alone is opposed to vainglory, and by this, I suppose, humility defends a man. But one often grows angry about money, and what is available to eat. Why then does he declare that humility does not become angry, or provoke to anger? Humility is a wonderful thing, as we keep saying, and it is powerful to put grace into the soul. As to the rest, the grace of God itself, going into the soul, defends it from these other two terrible passions. For what is more troublesome to one than to become angry and to anger his neighbour? As some of the seniors have said, it is altogether alien to a monk to become angry, and if one should become angry, unless he is quickly guarded by humbling himself, in a brief time, troubled as he is, and disturbing others, he will come under the authority of the devil. For this cause, he states that humility does not become angry or stir to anger. But why am I stating that it guards against these two passions? In fact, humility guards the soul from all the passions, and also, indeed, from all temptations. When Street Anthony saw all the traps of the devil spread out everywhere, he sighed and inquired of God how anyone could ever keep away from them. God replied, by humility. It is humility that allows you to escape all of them. And what is more wondrous, he added, they are unable to even touch you. Do you now see the power of humility? Do you perceive the grace which is joined to this virtue? For indeed, there is nothing more powerful than humility. If a troubling experience befalls a humble man, immediately he goes against himself. Immediately he blames himself as the one deserving punishment, and he does not try to accuse anyone or put the blame on someone else. The rest of the time, he continues on his way undisturbed, undepressed, with complete peace of mind, and so he does not have a reason to become angry or to anger anyone else. So you see that the holy man quite correctly said, before all else we need humility. There are two types of humility, just as there are two types of pride. The first type of pride is when a man hates his brother, considering him worth very little or nothing. By contrast, he puts a great value on himself. Such a one, except he quickly repent and take great care, will arrive quickly at that second form of pride by which he lifts himself up upon God, and ascribes what he does well, not to God, but rather to himself. Truly, brothers, I knew of a man who came to be in this wretched state. Right from the beginning, if one of these brothers said anything to him, he would say, who the devil is he? He is not Zosimos or one of his kind. Then he would start to lessen them and say, there is no one of any significance but Macarios. Then after a time he would say, who is Macarios? Anyway, there is no one of any worth, save perhaps Basil or Gregory. Then in a brief time he began to rebuke them, declaring, who is Basil? Who is Gregory? There is no one who really matters, save Peter and Paul. And I said to him, truly, my brother, you are going to hate these soon as well. And trust me, after a brief time he started to say, who is Paul? Who is Peter? There is none but the Holy Trinity. And so at last he raised himself up against God, and there he gave up. So we should, my brothers, take up the struggle against the first type of pride, for fear that little by little we fall into this full pride. There is also the pride of this world, and a pride of the monastic life. The pride of this world is when you are elevated above a brother, since you are richer or more good-looking or have better possessions. So when we perceive ourselves becoming vainglorious concerning these things, or on account of having a better monastery, or one that is more convenient, or when we have more brothers, we should see that we have attained a high point of this worldly pride. This is when a man is vainglorious about material things. And what will I say? When a man is elevated about a good voice, or his elegant psalmody, or his reasoning, or on account that he performs his work well. All these are like the first, and more than the pride of this world. But the pride of the monastic life is when a man becomes vain about performing his vigils, or fasting, or his piety, or his mode of life, or his fervour. There is even the case where a man becomes humble to gain glory. All these things, I say, are the pride of the monastic life. Admittedly, we are not lacking pride, but if we are proud of our monastic discipline, at least may we not be proud about material goods. This finishes what I have to say about the first type of pride, and also the second, the pride of this world, and the pride of the monastic life. It remains for us to discuss the two types of humility. The first type of humility is to think that your brother is smarter than you, and in everything to esteem him higher than yourself, and simply, as that saint said, to place oneself below all. The second type is to attribute to God all virtuous deeds. This is the perfect humility of the saints. It is brought about naturally in the soul by the performance of the commandments. It is just like a tree that bears much fruit. It is the fruit that bends the branches and brings them down, but when lacking fruit, the branches point up and grow straight. There are some types of trees which never produce any fruit as long as their branches are upright. But if stones are placed on the branches, they stay upright. But if stones are hung on the branches, they bend down and begin to produce fruit. It is the same with the soul. When it is humbled, it starts to produce fruit, and the more fruit it produces, the lower it becomes. So too with the saints. The closer they get to God, the more they reckon themselves to be sinners. I recall once we were conversing about humiliation, and one of the great lights of Gaza, hearing us declare, the closer a man is to God, the more he reckoned himself to be a sinner, was awestruck, and said, "How can this be?" He did not know, and desired to hear the answer. I said to him, "Lord of the first rank, tell me, how do you consider yourself with regard to the other laymen here?" And he told me, "I consider myself as great, and the first among the men of this city." I said then, "If you should travel to Caesarea, how would you consider yourself then?" "I would think somewhat less of my greatness." Then I said, "If you were to travel to Antioch, what then?" And he answered, "I would consider myself as a member of the common folk." I said, "And if you went from Caesarea to stand before the emperor, what would consider yourself then?" He answered, "I should consider myself as just one of the poor people." Then I told him, "There you go. In the same manner, the saints, the closer they draw near to God, the more they regard themselves as sinners." Abraham, when he beheld God, referred to himself as dust and ashes. And Isaiah declared, "Woe to me, for my lips are polluted." Just the same when Daniel was in the den of the lion, and Habakkuk came to him with a meal and said to him, "Receive the food which the Lord has sent to you." And Daniel answered, "For the Lord has remembered me." He had a very humble heart when he was in the lion's cave, for they did not consume him once and for all, not even after that. And so with wonder he cried, "The Lord has remembered me." Do you see the lowliness of the saints, and how their hearts were directed to it? Even when angels sent from God were sent to them to aid them, they were not turned from humility, but fled from self-honor. As men robed all in silk flee, if a filthy rag is cast to them, in order that their royal garments not be polluted, so the saints, robed in virtue, flee from human praise, for fear they be polluted by it. Those who want that type of glory are like a naked man who constantly looks to find a few rags, anything, to cover his shame. So also one who is naked of virtue wants to be glorified by others. So the holy men who are sent from God to aid men do not let go of humility. Thus on one occasion Moses declared, "I entreat you, Lord, send another more eloquent than me, because I have difficulty speaking and stutter." Jeremiah said on another occasion, "I am a child." So, every one of the saints, as I have stated before, obtained this humble nature by fulfilling the commandments. No one can explain how this comes to be, how humility is produced in the soul, unless a man learns this through experience. He is unable to learn it by verbal reasoning. One day Zosimos was speaking about humility. There was a sophist there, who, when he heard what was said, wanted to look more deeply into it, and he said, "Explain to me how you can consider yourself a sinner. Can you not see that you are a saint? Do you not perceive that you have already obtained virtue? Do you not perceive that you are fulfilling the commandments? How is this that you are doing all these things, and you still regard yourself to be a sinner?" The old man did not quite know how to answer, but he said, "I do not know how to explain it, but it is true." The sophist swept aside this statement and repeated his inquiry to know how this could be. But the old man still could not find a means of explaining it, and started to say with his normal saintly simplicity, "Do not test and confuse me. I can only tell you that this is precisely how I feel." Since I saw the old man hesitating about how to reply, I said to him, "Is this not like the sophists or physicians? When someone is studying it carefully and is practicing his craft bit by doing the work he obtains the state of mind fitting to a sophist or doctor, and he is incapable of speaking about it and does not know how to explain how bit by bit he was guided into that state of mind, because the soul has absorbed it imperceptibly. The same thing is found with respect to humility. The work of fulfilling the commandments produces a state of humility, and the means cannot be described in words." When he heard this, Abbot Zosimos was delighted and hugged me and said, "You have found the answer. It is as you say." The sophist, hearing this, had his disquiet put to rest and accepted the words, because the elders used to say that by doing things we create humility. When the state of true humility is produced in the soul, no one can find a sufficient description of it. When Abba Agathon was dying, the brothers said to him, "Father, are you fearful?" He said, "As much as it was within my ability I have observed the commandments, but I am only a man. How do I know if my work is pleasing to God? The judgment of man is one thing, the judgment of God is another entirely. See how he brought humility to our attention, guiding us to attain it. How it is produced in the soul, as I said, no one can find the words to explain, nor is it possible to take hold of it through the mind, if the soul through its deeds is found unworthy to know it. But the fathers had a habit of saying what produces it. Among the elders it used to be said that a brother asked one of the fathers, "What is humility?" And one of the elders answered, "Humility is a great and divine labor, and the road to humility is work, bodily effort, while seeking to know oneself, and to place oneself below all else, and praying to God about all things. This is the path to humility, but humility itself is something from God, and cannot be understood." Why is it said that bodily efforts bring the soul to humility, and how can it be said that bodily efforts have an effect on the soul? Concerning being below all, we have related above, because it is against the first type of pride. Because how can a man consider himself better than his brother, being puffed up about anything, or blaming or hating anyone, if he considers himself lower than all? In the same manner, to pray all the time is certainly the antidote for the second form of pride. It is clear that the humble man, the God-fearing man, knows full well that nothing good, nothing proper and sure happens in the soul without the aid and the authority of God. And therefore he does not cease praying that God act with mercy toward him. A man standing in need of everything from God is prepared to make progress. He understands how he will make progress, and is unable to be puffed up. He does not depend on his own talents, but attributes to God all the things he does right, and always gives thanks to him. He is constantly calling on God lest God stop aiding him, and so let his innate weakness and helplessness appear. So by his act of humility he prays, and by his prayer he becomes humble. Insomuch as he is regularly advancing in virtue, he is regularly increasing his humility. The more humble he becomes, the more aid he receives, and so he progresses by this virtue of humility. Now we come back to the question of why physical effort produces the state of humility, and what influence bodily toils has on the disposition of the soul. As I stated earlier, it is on account of the soul having fallen from the commandments into a state of disobedience, and then was given over, as St. Gregory says, to a love of pleasure and self-will which make one err, so that the soul begins to love the carnal pleasures, and in a sense is discovered to have received the same characteristics as the body, and to have become fully carnal. As is said, "My spirit will not dwell in men, for they are made of flesh," as much as the poor soul at the same time endures, and cooperates with the things done by the body, so also, the elder says, the bodily efforts guide it to humility. The state of the soul of a person that is healthy is one thing, and that of a sick person another, that of a hungry person another, that of a well-fed person another. So also the inclinations of a man riding a horse are different from those of a man riding a donkey, those of a man on a throne from those of a man seated on the floor. The inclinations of one robed in royal garments differ from one robed in rags. May we work to humble our body, and when the body is humble, the soul will be humble with it, so that it is said truly that bodily toils lead to humility. This is why Evagrius, when he was warring with the temptation of blasphemy, as a person with genuine wisdom, knowing that blasphemy comes from pride, and that when the body is humbled the soul is humbled with it, spent 40 days naked in the wilderness without shelter, so that his body was like a wild beast, covered with insects, and thus his body labor did not bring about blasphemy, but humility. Thus the elder was correct in saying that bodily efforts leads to humility. Let God, who is good, give us the grace of a humble nature, which delivers us from so much wickedness, and saves us from the greatest temptations.